Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Dark Gods, First Semester, by River Ramsey. Narrated by Amelie Griffin and Erik Bloomquist. 1. The massive stone castle sat atop the highest peak of the not-so-sunken city of Atlantis, its jagged spires cutting into the twilight sky like 7 spears ready to pierce the moon itself. Olympus Academy. The architecture was impressive, I'd give it that. Sure, I'd rather have been back in Manhattan with the nymphs, sipping cosmos and mixing illicit tinctures, but the hidden city had a certain ambience. Too bad it was only inhabited by gods and their immediate progeny. Mortals were way more fun. I glanced back at the shimmering red portal splitting the air behind me as it shrank closed and disappeared. Looked like I was either late to arrive or early. Probably late, since Mom had been reluctant to let me go, even though it was her idea to ship me off to college in the literal middle of nowhere. Time to face the hallowed halls that would be my home for the next 4 years. I slung the black leather bag that housed all my worldly possessions over my shoulder and stepped forward to face my destiny. Ivy wove all around the ancient stone surrounding the great iron gate, centered with the same Omega crest on the left of my jacket. Olympus Academy's school colors were blue, white, and silver, but the plaid bow all the girls had to wear around our necks was a bit high school for my liking. First order of business, as soon as I found my room and figured out where to procure a halfway decent cup of coffee, I was going to be making a few necessary alterations. I could already hear my mother's scolding voice, and the last conversation we'd had, before I'd managed to pry myself out of her arms and enter the portal, was still rattling around in my head like a loose marble. I expect you to be on your best behavior, young lady. I won't have you acting like some demi and making Cronus question his decision to have you wed his son. As far as I was concerned, the king of the gods and his emo brat could kiss my ass. But the last time I'd made the mistake of saying as much out loud, Mom had grounded me for a week. I was 18 now, but I'd simply traded her authority for the council's, and in 4 years' time, I'd be expected to return to the underworld with my unwanted fiancé and play the part of a proper goddess of death. If Hades hadn't come to the school 2 years prior, I might have actually looked forward to these 4 years of freedom. The gate creaked and groaned as it fell shut behind me, and I headed down the winding stone path that led to the academy's front door. With massive Grecian pillars and a gray stone exterior, it was a strange yet appealing architectural amalgamation of the cultural deities that dwelled within. My attention naturally gravitated toward the greenery surrounding the building. The grass was such a rich, dark shade of green, it almost seemed blue, and the pathway was lined with green plants whose flowers weren't yet in bloom. That was easy enough to remedy. I stretched out my hand on the way past, and petals every shade of yellow, pink, and purple unfurled, making the journey a far less ominous one. If the groundskeeper got pissed, they'd find a way to deal. If I was stuck here, I was determined to add a little color to the place, one way or another. As I reached the top of the steps, the doors flew open without me even having time to reach for the handle. Enchanted stone. Impressive. I stepped into the great hall, and my footsteps echoed up to the domed ceiling. There was a skylight adorned with white frosted glass in the shape of the Omega symbol, letting in just enough light to make the marble floors shimmer. The circular lobby was adorned with pictures of the school's various founders and prestigious members, and my mother's portrait was among them. I'd inherited her light brown hair, but not the flowing ringlets, and I'd dyed mine an ungodly shade of lilac, according to her. We had the same eyes, though, and I knew with the limitations the relatively conservative school uniform imposed, rather than my usual neopunk duds, I was going to be easily recognizable as Demeter's daughter to any god who'd so much as met her. Poor fools. They had no idea just how far an apple could roll from its tree. I took my time studying the various portraits until I reached the one in the very center, hanging a few feet above the rest. The frame was silver, decorated with runes and a plaque that read, Headmaster. I'd never met Odin in the flesh, but he was easy enough to pick out. His snow-white hair was slicked back from his proud forehead in a debonair fashion. His eyes were as gray and sharp as a steel blade, and it felt like he was watching me somehow. I leaned, just to make sure it was an illusion that his eyes were following me, and I could swear the raven on his shoulder moved just the slightest hair. While I was contemplating the likelihood that the portrait was some sort of magical security camera, someone touched my shoulder and I spun around, raising my hand as a vine crawled from my vein and poked through my skin, wrapping around my wrist and ready to strangle. The wide blue eyes that met mine were full of alarm, but not even a hint of malice, and they belonged to the most beautiful boy I'd ever seen. I say boy because from the golden curls cascading down his shoulders to his full lips, he was too feminine and innocent-looking to be a man, even if he technically was one. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you," he said, casting a curious glance at the vine around my wrist. The vine quickly retreated as I collected myself. So much for making a good first impression. "Sorry about that," I mumbled, adjusting the strap of my bag on my shoulder. "Guess I'm a little jumpy. This place gives me the creeps." "It is rather ominous," he agreed with a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. They were as clear as water, and the light danced on them like it did on gentle waves. He glanced up at the painting I'd been studying a second ago. "Admiring our headmaster?" "Admiring might not be the right word," I said carefully. He laughed, and it was a flippant, musical little sound that reminded me of the first tinges of spring. "Be careful who you say that around. The Odin sons are tight-knit, for all their rivalry." "I'll keep that in mind." "Kory," I said, offering my hand, "but everyone calls me Kory." "Kory," he said, mulling over my name. The quirk of his lips suggested he liked the way it tasted. "I'm Dionysus. A pleasure." When he took my hand, I was surprised at just how smooth it was. I felt a strange warmth run up my forearm and down my spine. It had the aftertaste of magic, and as I pulled my hand away, it lingered in my palms. "Sorry about that," he said in a tone so rueful it made me doubt it was on purpose, whatever the hell it was. "Is that your gift?" "I'm afraid it's not entirely within my control," he said, with a sigh of casual despair. "It's fine, but what is it?" He hesitated, worrying his bottom lip. The look of trepidation on his face was kind of adorable. He reminded me of a curious little rabbit, ready to spring away if someone got too close. "Well, it's called ecstasy." I raised an eyebrow. Not my idea, he assured me. It's kind of a feeling of euphoria. It happens when I touch someone, and I can usually contain it enough to keep them from noticing. But you must be particularly sensitive. Euphoria, huh? My interest was piqued, and I couldn't help but show it. Like an endorphin rush? He blinked. Yes, actually. Do you have it too? No, just interesting, that's all, I answered. Ever since Mom had found out about my Panaceas slinging operation, her plan to send me away had been cemented. Not really sure why she thought that would stop me, considering the young gods who populated the academy were a lot like my clients back home. Bored immortals looking for any way to pass the time and dull the sting of the endless abyss looming before them. Ennui was a hell of an affliction, and a girl could score herself a whole lot of dough offering the remedy. What do you call yours? He asked, tilting his head. That plant thing you did. I couldn't help but laugh, rubbing my wrist. It didn't hurt, but it always itched a little afterward. That's what you get for turning a beautiful gift into a common arena trick. Doesn't really have a name, I admitted. I can just control plants. That's wonderful, he said in a surprisingly sincere tone. The flowers outside, was that you as well? Figured the place could use a little sprucing up, I said, glancing around. It's 50 shades of gray up in this bitch. His pale cheeks grew pink. Something told me Dionysus was a bit sheltered. You're an interesting person, Kory. I'd say you'll like it here, but I'm not entirely sure that's true. Probably not, I agreed. What about you? He glanced away, a troubled look coming into his eyes. I did last semester. There was a lot left unsaid after those words, and the air felt a little heavier with the weight of them floating around. Before I could ask what had changed between now and then, he posed a question of his own. Can I ask why you transferred in the middle of the year? Yeah, that's kind of a long story, I answered. One that involved getting busted for running a magical drug-dealing operation, which would probably make Blue Eyes turn and run for dear life. Let's just say I've been putting it off. Oh, he murmured. Any reason in particular? Yep, his name is Hades. His eyes widened, and he looked like he was about to melt into the floor. Hades? Oh, then you must be... Yeah, that's me, I sighed. His reaction to my fiancé's name was more proof I didn't need to avoid him. I take it you know him. Everyone does, he answered in a reverent, if fearful tone. He's part of the triad. I frowned. The triad? That's what they call themselves. They run the school, he mumbled. There's Hades, Fenrir, and Loki. You've already met his father. He glanced up at Odin's portrait. So the headmaster's brat and the crown prince rule the school, just like their daddies run the council of the gods. I rolled my eyes. What a shocker. Dionysus glanced around nervously, and when he took my arm to lead me toward one of the great staircases framing either side of the lobby, I decided to follow him. You should be careful what you say around here. The walls have ears. And eyes, apparently. I'm serious. Even if you are Hades' fiancé, he's not to be trifled with, he said, lowering his voice to a whisper. Those three are like the mafia of Olympus Academy, and they don't take disrespect lightly. Jeez. Whatever these guys were pulling to have the other young gods skittering around like nervous cats Someone needed to take them down a peg. Not me, of course. I was already sworn to be on my best behavior. Chill. I'm not gonna cause trouble, I told him, since he seemed anxious enough. Where is everyone anyway? Classes don't start till tomorrow, and people usually come in at the last possible moment, he explained. I could show you the dorms if you'd like. Sounds good, I answered, following him down the equally ornate west wing upstairs. At least there were no creepy portraits in these halls. The windows were huge, overlooking a garden far more expansive than the lackluster landscaping out front. Looked like I'd already found my favorite spot. The dorms are all on this floor. Girls are in the east wing, boys in the west, he said, letting his arm slip from mine. I realized this time his touch hadn't sparked ecstasy. Not that it was really something to mind, but I had a rule back home. No indulgence. It seemed like that was going to be an equally important rule of thumb to follow here, if the other guys were half as hot as Dionysus. Then again, something gave me the impression I wasn't really his cup of tea. Do you know which room is yours? He asked, once we came to an open area I assumed was the girls' lounge, given the corner library and the billiard table in the center of the room. I pulled the small scroll that had come with my admissions letter out of my jacket pocket, and a number materialized on the page. 333. Lucky, he said with a grin, coming to a stop in front of a big stone door with silver filigree all along the frame. Fancy, I snorted, touching the handle. As soon as I did, magic flared beneath my fingertips, and the door popped open. Security, Dionysus explained, standing by. I took his sleeve and pulled him in with me. My eyes widened as I took in the lavish space. My room back home in the Manhattan loft I shared with my mother was nice, but nothing compared to this. Holy shit. Dionysus gave me a look, folding his arms as he leaned against the wall separating the ensuite bathroom from the rest of my room. You're going to get a demerit before your first day is over. Wouldn't be the first time, I told him, dropping my bag on the bed. It was easily king-sized, surrounded by 3 massive marble pillars and dressed in white covers so luxurious I wanted to jump in and curl up, but exploration called. This is sweet. This is Olympus Academy, he reminded me in a coy tone. Only the best for the future elite. I rolled my eyes, sliding open the glass door that led out onto a small balcony. I had a gorgeous view of the gardens below, and even though it was hard to resist the urge to prune and tweak anything green and budded to perfection, it was hard to find anything to criticize. Maybe this place wasn't going to be so bad after all. I have this whole place to myself? I asked doubtfully. There are more gods than goddesses in attendance, so most of the girls have singles, he explained. I could tell he was less than thrilled about it, too. Shitty roommate, huh? Atlas, he mumbled. He's a complete jock, which I don't mind aesthetically, but I could do without the collection of running shoes as vast as it is odoriferous. I laughed. So, my assumption about him being into guys wasn't totally off. Sounds torturous. Oh, I shouldn't have said that, he sighed. I'm not exactly out, but you seem less stuffy than most, so... Your secret's safe with me. And if it has to be a secret, that's bullshit, I said, starting to pull my clothes out of my bag. Something tells me I'm gonna hate this place as much as I thought. It's not so bad, he assured me. There are cliques and unspoken rules, Like any other college. Once you learn to navigate them, you'll be fine. I'm more of a shortest point from A to B person, I admitted. Well, you're Hades' fiancé, so no one will pick on you. I grimaced. I couldn't see why that would be a plus to him. But the idea that my reputation here was already decided by being Hades' future property didn't sit well with me. If anyone was going to ruin my reputation, it was me. Sorry. I know arranged marriages can be a bit of a sensitive topic, he said apologetically. Don't be. It's whatever, I said, shaking off the gloom that seemed to settle in easily in this glorified mausoleum. I've got 4 years to enjoy myself, so until then, it's Hades who. He gave me a doubtful look. Whatever you say, but you'd probably be the only girl in school who isn't dreaming about becoming queen of the underworld. He's kind of a big deal. I'm sure he thinks he is, I snorted, hanging up my favorite leather jacket. It was dyed purple, a shade darker than my hair, and originally I'd bought it because Mom hated it, but it had grown on me in its own right. The disapproving grimaces every time I headed out the door wearing it were just a bonus. That's a lot of clothes for such a small bag, Dionysus said, blinking at my mostly empty satchel. You like? I picked it up, dangling it by the strap. It's enchanted. I could fit a baby elephant in here if I wanted. Where did you come by a thing like that? He asked, studying it curiously when I tossed it to him. My Aunt Athena makes them, I answered, laughing at the starstruck look on his face. The Athena? I'll have you know I'm the black sheep of a very prestigious family, I told him, flopping down on the edge of my bed. You and me both, he said with a heavy sigh, offering the bag to me. Keep it. His eyes widened. Seriously? I've got another back home. Besides, since I'm Hades' fiancé, I can probably just get some hunky manservants to follow me around carrying my books, I said dryly. You're joking, but I'm sure there's a form in the administrative building for that. I groaned. Just call me Kory, and not Hades' fiancé, and we're even. I'd like to have at least one friend at this school who doesn't see me as the death god's property. Dionysus gave me a smile that made the callous stone feel a bit warmer. Now that I can do. 2. Early Monday morning, I put on my freshly pressed uniform and checked the mirror to make sure I hadn't hemmed my skirt to the point where I was going to get scolded before I stepped foot inside the classroom. Human politics was the first class of the day, and while the subject was less than rousing, I had looked over the course description, and it didn't feel like I'd missed much from the first semester. Living among humans had to count for more than reading about them in a book anyway. With my books in my hand, I left my room and found myself face to face with a tall, red-haired girl in a bath towel. I guess we were comfy like that. Oh, she said, blinking at me. You're new? And you're naked. She looked down at her towel and laughed. Daphne, she said, reaching to shake my hand. You must be Persephone. I grimaced. I go by Kory, but yep, that's me. Well, I'd stay and chat, but I've got to finish getting ready for class, she said, walking to stand in front of the door next to me. We're neighbors, so let me know if you need a tour later. Thanks, I might take you up on that, I said, watching her disappear into the room. So far, the only 2 people I'd met had been friendly enough. So how bad could this place really be? Maybe I was worried for nothing. Dionysus was a bit skittish. I walked down the stairs and followed the herd to what I hoped would end up being the dining hall. I'd get an odd glance every now and then, and I heard Hades's name whispered more often than mine, but that was nothing new. I'd never even met the guy, and he'd been looming over me like the ghost of Christmas future ever since my 10th birthday, when my mother and his father had made the arrangement official. She was smart to do it back then, while I was still finding my voice and was too naive and preoccupied with playing in the garden to put up a protest. I could technically back out if I wanted to, but that would mean offending the Cronus. While adding to my mother's collection of gray hairs was my favorite pastime, according to her, I didn't want to make her life that hard. Besides, I had 4 years, give or take, to find a more kosher way out of this, and for all I knew, Hades was dreading it just as much. I could hope. The dining hall was even more lavish than the rest of the building, with long stone tables and a buffet that lined one entire wall. Servants clad in white suits darted about, carrying trays of gourmet meals for those who didn't feel like undergoing the ordeal of getting their own food. The heavenly aromas made my stomach growl, but I had to find a seat before I did anything about it. I scanned the crowded hall for a moment before I caught sight of Dionysus, who was already waving to me. I noticed that he was seated alone, a good distance from the cluster of blondes sitting a bit further down the table. "Hey," I said, walking over to join him. "I see you're finding your way already," he said with a grin. "Definitely a morning person." "I just followed the herd," I said, yawning. I glanced over to my right. "Who are the Viking chicks?" "Those are the Valkyries," he answered. "They're harmless, unless you piss them off. And trust me, you don't want to piss them off." "Noted," I said, catching the glint of the short blade on the nearest girl's hip. "Come on, let's get some food," Dionysus said, nodding toward the buffet line. "How long is this place open?" I asked, looking around the room. Students seemed to come and go leisurely. "All hours, but there are rushes around breakfast, lunch, and dinner," he explained. "The upperclassmen have more flexibility in their schedules due to special training." "Special training?" "You choose a course junior year," Dionysus said, handing me a clean plate. "Leadership, warfare, or domestic?" Leadership and warfare made enough sense, but the third one flew over my head. "What's domestic?" Dionysus looked at me like I'd grown 2 more heads as he collected fruit on his plate. I went right for the French toast and what looked like a croissant with icing. "You know, fertility magic, entertaining, the arts, how to be a goddess 101. "Fuck that," I said, wrinkling my nose. "You've seriously never heard of it?" "No," I muttered. Something told me Mom had intentionally kept that little factoid from me to avoid further deterring me from attending. And I bet I knew what her major had been. "Don't worry, it's not gender segregated," he laughed. "The Valkyries always pick warfare, and they always make the final rounds of the games." "Oh, yeah," I murmured. The Olympic Games were by far the most identifiable aspect of the Academy, even if they weren't as widely televised as their human counterparts. Gods traveled from all over the world to attend, and having a child who performed well in the games was a point of pride among the Council of the Gods. Competing itself was an honor reserved for those who'd proven themselves worthy and strong enough to endure the trials of the academic year and secure recommendation from a faculty member. My competitive.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?